What's up guys? Today I'm going to cover how I catch more bass in the summertime with a trick worm or a stick bait. This video is sponsored by Catchco, so the baits that I'm going to be showing you today are actually made by Catchco, and you can find the link to these baits in the description down below, as well as what they're called. So this is the BIOSPAWN EXOSTICK. I've been using this a lot and I've been having a lot of luck with it lately. And then for a little bit more finesse approach when the bass are being really funny, this is KARL'S Amazing Baits, a little short stick bait. So let's start from the beginning. It's summertime, it's done got hot. So you guys know, if you've been out fishing in this heat, normally the bite turns on first thing in the morning and then late in the evening. You know, for here it's usually after 4 or 5 o'clock. Let's say I'm out fishing in the middle of the day and I found a spot where I know there's fish at. Now there's no wind, there's no clouds, it's hot, it's sunny, it's slick out. I was just catching bass here, but now the bass have shut down. I know they're still here. That's when I reverted this technique. So let's say it's the middle of the day and I haven't found the fish yet. I won't use this technique. I won't pick a trick worm up. If I'm looking for the fish, I'm throwing a search bait. I'm throwing a spinner bait, I'm throwing a square bill, I'm throwing something moving fast, and I'm covering ground. Because lately, for me, in the summertime, the bass in the middle of the day, unless you just find an area where they're feeding, they're stacked up, I've been finding them spread out. I'll be throwing a spinner bait or a square bill or something, or a chatterbait or a swim jig, and I'll pick one up here, I'll pick one up there. They're just spread out. They're not all stacked up. But let's say you just caught 3 or 4 bass. It was cloudy, it was windy, there was current, the bass were feeding really good, and then the wind disappears, the clouds disappear, the sun comes out, the current stops, you know, whatever reason, those bass have quit feeding, but you still know they're there. That's when I pick up the stick bait or the trick worm. With the stick bait and the trick worm, there are several different ways that I fish it. It depends on the area. If I'm in an area that's got some grass in it, it's not a hard bottom, I'll fish this bait differently than the way I would fish it if there is a hard bottom. Either way, for both techniques, I like using a 1/0 straight shank hook. So keep in mind, the shorter the hook you use, the more action you're going to allow the tail of that bait to have whenever you go to move it around. The longer the hook, the more of that bait you're pinning off, and that bait is going to be straight, and less action the rest of the bait is going to have. And I also like to use an 1/8 ounce tungsten. And with any situation, fishing a trick worm or a stick bait, unless there's really heavy cover, I like to use 12-pound fluorocarbon, because it's the middle of the day, it's sunny. I want something that those bass aren't going to be able to see very well. And 12-pound fluorocarbon is pretty much invisible. It also has a little stretch, which I'm going to cover why I like the stretch in a minute. So the higher you go up in fluorocarbon, the less stretch that fluorocarbon is going to have, or with any line, monofilament as well. But monofilament is going to have more stretch than fluorocarbon. But with 12-pound fluorocarbon, let's say if I'm fishing a grassy area, so what I like to do is I throw that bait out, I let it hit the bottom, and with this 1/8 ounce tungsten, it's just enough to get down in that grass and get stuck in the grass. So what I'll do, I'll feel it stuck in the grass, and I'll give it a really slow pull up. And what happens whenever you give it that slow pull is that weight is going to come out of that grass. That line is going to stretch, and the end of your pole is going to bend if you're not using a very stiff rod, and that bait is going to slingshot right out of that grass. And then I'll let it fall again. And a lot of times when that bait goes to slingshot out of that grass is when I get the bite, or either right after that on the fall, because the bass see that thing slingshot out the grass, that just drives them crazy and they come get it. So that's one way that I like to fish this thing when it's in grass. And you guys see I have my weight pegged here. Now normally I peg my weight, and it depends on what kind of area I'm fishing whether I actually put my peg on my weight or not. So if I'm fishing a hard bottom, I put my peg right on my weight like that. I'll give it just a little bit of space. So with a peg on the weight like that, what it's going to do is it's going to give that bait a little bit more action. And it's going to keep that weight right there, and it's going to allow that bait to flex back and forth while you're hopping it off the bottom. So I'm going to show you guys later in the video how I'm actually fishing this bait on a hard bottom or an area where there's sticks and cover. But generally, if I'm fishing an area that's got a sandy or a hard bottom, what I like to do is just hop that bait off the bottom. Just give it a little hop hop and then pause. Pick my slack up in my line to make sure that there's not a fish on there, because you'd be surprised how many times a fish picks it up, especially in the middle of the day when they're really finicky like this and they're just not wanting to bite everything. That bass will pick it up and you won't even feel it. So after I give my bait a little bit of action, if I feel that there's pressure on the end of the line and it feels like it's grass or it's a stick, if it's just not a slack line, I'll pick it up really slow and then I'll feel it to make sure it's not a fish and it's not pulling back. Now, a lot of people like to use a Ned rig or a shaky head or something that's got the hook exposed coming out of it. Well, that doesn't work for me very well in my area, because in my area, I've got a lot of sticks, a lot of stuff to get hung up on. You know, you're fishing grass. If you're fishing grass and you got a shaky head on and it's got a little hook coming out, I catch a lot of grass. That's why I like using like a 1/0 straight shank hook, because it's pretty much weedless. Now, let's say if I am fishing grass, what I like to do is I will move that peg for that weight up like that. So what will happen a lot of times, that weight will fall down in that grass and it'll get stuck. And then whenever you go to pull that worm to get it out of the grass, that worm is going to catch up with that weight and it's going to hit it. And it's going to slingshot out the grass all at one time. So what you got going on there, you've got what looks like a worm or an eel or something like that is pegging that piece of grass. It's attacking it and it's eating something, and then it pops out. Whenever those bass see something feeding, they see something chasing something, something attacking something, it triggers them into getting those extra bites. And the size of my weight varies on the depth that I'm fishing, you know, the type of grass. So let's say if I'm fishing a certain type of grass like hydrilla, and the weight that I have on isn't quite heavy enough to peg down in that hydrilla and get stuck, I'll put a little bit heavier weight on. But if you put too much of a weight on, what's going to happen is that weight isn't just going to barely get stuck in that hydrilla or the milfoil or whatever you're fishing. It's going to go way down in the grass, and you're going to have to pull really hard to rip it out of that grass. I don't like that. I like my weight being just big enough to where that thing will barely get stuck in the grass. So whenever you pull it, your pole will go to bend and that thing will slingshot out the grass. And a lot of times that's when I get the bites. So now that I've covered the theory part of this, I'm going to show you guys some clips with me actually using the stick bait or the trick worm. Now in this video I am using the stick bait, but I also use this technique when I'm using a trick worm. Alright guys, this is the BIOSPAWN EXOSTICK here. I'm going to spray it down with some good old lure spray here. And we're going to go to work and we're going to catch some toads. You guys see all this timber under this bridge right here? This looks like a really good spot for bass to be hanging out at. I guess that doesn't mean there is one here though. Ooh, that's a fish. Oh, took my damn worm. Well, guys, I had a bite. That's a good sign. It did not feel like a brim. It was big, whatever it was. It was either a big mudfish or a big bass. So what I was doing there, guys, I let my worm hit the bottom, and then I popped it up, and then I let it fall again with a slack line, and then I popped it up, and then I let it fall. Whenever I went to pull up on it again, that fish had grabbed it. So I'm gonna go over my setup with you guys real quick. I'm using the PC Fun Elite. I've got the PC Fun Serpent. It's a medium rod with a fast action tip, and it's 610. And I like using this 610 rod in the river because it's shorter. I'm closer to the water, and it's harder to cast with a longer rod in the kayak, being this close to the water. So the shorter rod allows me to have more accuracy from the kayak. See some bubbles coming up from that stick right there. So guys, anytime I see bubbles coming up, I always check it out. I always cast at it, because it could be a turtle. It could be a turtle down there. It could be a catfish, but it could be a bass feeding. It could be a bass eating a crawdad or eating anything off the bottom. And there's been several times that I've seen bubbles and cast it over and caught a bass. Not always, but probably about a 50-50 chance. So guys, there's a couple different ways that I work a trick worm. One of my favorite ways to work it, that I do most often, is with a small weight. The smallest weight I can get away with. So a trick worm or stick bait, whichever one. I like having really light line, like 12-pound fluorocarbon, because 12-pound fluorocarbon has some stretch to it. If you use a rod that's got a medium tip, not a real stiff tip, and it's a shorter rod, like a 610 or a 6.6, especially with you got some stretch to your line. So if you're using like 12-pound fluorocarbon and 12-pound monofilament, and I like fluorocarbon because you can feel more of what's going on. You can feel more contact with the bottom and what you're hitting. And I'm also using 1/8 ounce tungsten, so that helps me feel what's down there too. But the way I work it, I let it hit the bottom, and then I'll give it a quick sharp pop, and that thing will hop up off the bottom like that. And then what happens with that weight separates from it whenever it comes up. It slingshots off the bottom from the stretch in the line and stretching the bend and then in the pole, and then that weight separates from the tip of it, and it looks like that little worm is chasing that weight back down to the bottom. And most of the time I get my bites after I pop it, and then right when it hits the bottom, or right before it hits the bottom, they'll pick it up. But sometimes after you pop it, they'll suck it in and you won't feel them. So that's why I don't do a steady hop pop retrieve. So I'll pop it off the bottom, and then I'll kind of pull up really slow and make sure that there's not a fish on there, or I'm feeling for a stick, if there's anything on there. Because more often than not, you'll go to pull up like that and you'll feel weight, and then you'll think it's a stick or a piece of grass or something, and then it'll start pulling back. But if you just pop it like that and that fish has got it in its mouth, he's going to feel you and he's going to let go. You just kind of got to figure out what the fish want. And the best way to do that is to watch the bait fish in there and see how the bait fish are acting. The bait fish are being real erratic, and they're making a bunch of quick movement and hopping all over the place. They're swimming really fast. They're darting back and forth. That's whenever I like to do that pop retrieve. But if they're being really sluggish and they're really slow and they're just moving around, you know, they're hardly moving at all. Say if there's not a lot of oxygen in the water, maybe it's really hot, they're not moving very fast, that's whenever I do the slow retrieve, just barely moving it. Guys, one thing I like to do that, you know, not a lot of people think about is whenever I'm working that bait, I'm thinking about how that bait is acting under the water. Thinking about what that bait's doing. You know, if I work my pole this way, the bait's going to move that way. Seems like it helps me get bites whenever I picture what the bait is doing under the water while I'm working it. So let's talk about rigging your worm, your trick worm, when you're fishing like I'm fishing right now. So I like to leave the hook coming out a little bit, especially with that tungsten weight, because when you pop it, that weight is going to hit that and it's going to make a little dink. And what that noise imitates is bait fish feeding or crawfish feeding. Either way, whatever it imitates, it gets the bass's attention and they come check it out. Ooh, that's a fish. Got him. Oh, this is a big one. This is a big one. Is it a bass? It's a bass. It's a bass. It's a nice one. Oh, yep, camera all wet. Check him out, boys. It's a good 2-pound river bass right there. All right, let's let it go. All right, guys, since the bass are being difficult down the river, we've come to the pond. We're gonna actually catch some fish before it gets dark. Oh, that's a bite. Got a bite, guys. What the heck is that? It's not even a bass. That's the new smallest bass of the year. Oh, he didn't make it back in the water. Oh, there it went. The thing was tiny. I got a bite, guys. Oh, oh, this is a big one. It's a big one. It's a big one. Holy cow. Holy cow. Oh, it is a big one. It is a really big one. Come on over here. Come on over here, girl. That's like a 5 or 6 pounder, guys. That's a giant one. Let's see if I can get in here without breaking my line. Oh, oh, oh. We're falling in the water. Daggone. Well, I can't go down there. Got it. Check her out, boys. She's probably about 4. All right, guys, I got the hook out of it. Let's go ahead and let it go. Hopefully it'll swim off since I gut hooked it. Yeah, she's gonna be all right.
All right, guys, we're gonna go ahead and say bye before it gets dark. Please smash that like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you again next time.